When you get an opportunity, step into it, have faith, and don't be afraid to take the odd risk here and there. And relationships matter, period.
This podcast encourages and empowers you to create your own unique real story, develop your own unique real statement, and discover your own unique real self. The power is yours. Good afternoon, David Peck. Previously, episode 1240 of the 12-Minute Convos podcast. It's been just 2 years, 3 months, 9 days, and 20 hours since we last had that conversation.
That's great.
Plus or minus a few minutes, right? But that was then. This is now. My friend, David, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well. Yeah. How are you?
I'm excellent. Thanks for asking. I remember our conversation just like it was yesterday. You are a podcaster. Face to Face is an amazing podcast doing amazing things. Please tell me how things have evolved.
Yeah, it's been exciting. We're probably going to cross 500 published interviews. Typically, they're 30 to 45-minute interviews. I'm really starting to take more of a focus toward filmmakers. I've been interviewing a lot of documentarians of late. I've been interviewing producers as well, actors. This past Toronto International Film Festival was really exciting. I got to interview David Thewlis from the Harry Potter films, and Hugo Weaving, Lord Elrond, and Agent Smith from The Matrix, and Fisher Stevens, some high-level sort of actors, but also some really important films as well. About 25 conversations at TIFF. Hot Docs is coming up. And as you know, my podcast, philosopher.ca, it's all about sort of moving the needle. It's about a conversation that you hope and trust is going to shift the dialogue in some way, that somebody's going to listen and say, you know what, never thought of that before. I want to dig a bit deeper. Or that's somebody I need to touch base with. Or there's something I haven't thought of before. So it's about peeling back those layers and trying to celebrate the work, that people like you are doing, for instance, So I hope you're going to be a guest one of these days soon.
Good. I'd be honored to be interviewed by the great David Peck. How does it feel, though? And how has it impacted your mind in terms of when you listen, or if you would be willing to listen to episode 1 and then listen to episode 482 or plus 1, right? How have you seen the improvement? Has there been improvement?
What a great question. It really is. I mean, I would want to sort of leave that to the critics, if you will. I would want to leave that to people like you to really comment. But I think if I was to step in, and that's something maybe I need to do, listen to episode 1 and then a few along the way. I think there's been improvement. So for instance, there's been improvement around just the tech side of it. But one of the things that I think I've learned is that in order to step into a, let's say, theatrical/recorded conversation, it's important that there's a little bit of pre-conversation so that I actually get to know this person. And so I spoke to a woman last week, Cornelia Principe, who's produced a film called Prey, a very sensitive issue. It's a Canadian film coming out soon, will be available. It's about sex abuse in the Catholic Church. So really disturbing, stuff and difficult, tragic storytelling, and yet ultimately, hopeful. But what was really important was that I had 10 or 15 minutes with her before the conversation started. So for me, that's like an important takeaway, that the better you know someone, it sort of presupposes that the better you know someone, the better your questions are going to be. There's a little bit of trust that's been developed. And that's what I've found with my interviews, that the trust factor is huge. And that it's essential to having a good conversation. So if your guest knows going in that you're going to be respectful, that you've seen their film, that you've taken the time to take notes, that you're being thoughtful, that you're willing to go a little deeper, this has been an important sort of insight for me. I think I've kind of known that all the way along, but I think now doing it professionally has really emphasized that.
It summarizes respect, doesn't it? If I had to super summarize the experience you've had there, it's really respecting the other person and the fullness of who they are. Isn't that an applicable principle across the board?
Oh, it absolutely is. I think, what's amazing, and it's a really great insight, because I think one of the things for me with my podcast too is that I've learned is that almost every podcast, every interview that I have, I come away with a sense of, and sometimes we make note of it. This is really about listening. And in order to have a good podcast, in order to have a good interview, in order to have a good conversation, you really do have to listen. And it sounds so simple. it sounds so trite of an observation, but so many of us, including myself, are not great listeners. We're just waiting to get our point in. We just can't wait to make I've got a question for you. I'm not really hearing. I might be hearing what you're saying, but am I actually taking it in? Am I empathizing? Roger Ebert says that movies are empathy-making machines, and I had somebody recently say that about my podcasting. That, David, you're trying to empathize with others. You're trying to sort of level the playing field. And I just thought it was a really wonderful comment about the art of conversation, I guess. What you're doing basically as well, going around the world and making actual contact with people in so many different walks of life, and emphasizing the power of not just words, but the power of relationship, which I think, respect has to be a huge part of. And again, trust and being able to say, yes, I heard what you said, therefore, ... How is it now going to change the way I act towards you? How is it going to make me love my wife more? How is it going to make me behave differently towards my coworkers? Those are the things that matter for me. One of the things I've really noticed too is that your comment about respect is bang on, because I am blown away by how many authors and how many filmmakers I have on my podcast who say to me, wow, David, you actually read my book, or you actually watched the film. You looked for things, you made connections. And that to me is just kind of astounding.
Now, there's a voice that guides you, that person that speaks within, that has given you that ability to say, okay, I'm going to do this, right? The voice that said you should do it. What helps you to discern the things you should do or do not do, specifically to approaching respect, if you would?
Mm-hmm. Also a good question. I would say the community of people around me are probably the most important. My wife, Elizabeth, my two kids who are getting older and are precocious and thoughtful and sensitive. And every parent thinks that about their kids, I guess. But, they're asking great questions. They remind me of what's important, and people who really, truly do care for me and have a concern for me that I've invested in as well, I suppose, with them. And so it's a two-way street. It's a conversation, I think, Angel. I think it's related, if that makes sense to what we're talking about here. But I would say the short answer is it's a community of people that I've surrounded myself with, and who genuinely love me and are looking out for me, as corny as that may sound.
Sounds great to me. Being a conversationalist, there's the ability, and I think people get it mixed up when they think that to listen means that the voices that you hear that want to ask the next question, right? Or had the question prepared from before and has to put it in here. It's allowing that voice to come through and then saying, hey, internally it's okay, but there's this other question that's in alignment with the person. Now, there's a conversation that many people put on the back shelf, or sometimes it's in the forefront of their thinking. And I'd like to know how you approach that conversation, which is the conversation of death, the possibility that you could die today or tomorrow. How do you interact with that conversation, David?
Oh, wow. That's a big question. Well, it's so funny. And I'm sure you've done some research on my background and so on. So I've been studying philosophy for many, many years. And I would call myself a bit of an existentialist and a realist as well. But so I've thought about death a great deal. And I think that what it teaches me when it comes up, and sometimes it's as specific as being at somebody's funeral. It's in your face, it's visceral. You're having conversations, you're honoring somebody who's passed away recently. So that's in the middle of it. But when driving down the highway and you end up reflecting on something as a result of this recent Iranian plane crash, in the Ukraine. I mean, how can you not start thinking about the afterlife potentially, or what's next, So anyway, all of that to say, the thought of death makes me more present each and every day. And as I get older and as my body starts to break down, I realize that, wow, it's I'm with you right now in this conversation. How's that?
Yeah.
So, and that again, it's so beautiful. I love the way our conversation has this thread of trust and respect and relationship, because it's, being present, as a friend of mine would say, learning how to be present in the grace of one day. And what does that actually mean? Well, it means that if I'm with Elizabeth, my wife, over dinner, that's where I am. I'm not thinking about the next podcast conversation or the next book that I'm hoping to write or the next event that I'm going to. No, I'm here. If I'm playing chess with my son, that's where I am. So I think for me, this idea of death as tragic, I mean, there's a part of me that's not okay with death at all, by the way, just so you know.
Yeah, I can say that too. Yeah, it's like, could you stay over there, please? Right?
That's right. Yeah, like I'm kind of getting used to this thing called life. I'm getting used to this, So what's up with that? So, but anyway, I love the question, but I think the reality is it's allowing me to be more and more present each and every day. So.
Well, I believe Elizabeth, Spencer, and Victoria are proud to call you a friend, a close friend, right? One that they live with, my friend. I'm honored for the opportunity to call in and to know that you've not given up and that you've continued. It is both inspirational and motivational, because what you are doing is a service to humanity.
Thanks, man.
You're very welcome. I mean that from my heart. In closing, David, is there anything else you'd like to share with our amazing audience?
I would like to say, yeah, thanks. I think I would just like to say that when you get an opportunity, step into it. Life is only understood by moving forward. Kierkegaard said it well. Pascal said it well. Many people have. You won't understand it till you look back, but it comes down to the choices we make. So step in, have faith, and don't be afraid to take the odd risk here and there. And relationships matter, period. How's that?
I love it. I love F to F, face to face, but sometimes, there's the concept of the biblical story of David and Goliath, it's like this face to face. It's getting over the fear and having that conversation with self to be able to have, that conversation that could seem fearful, but you run into it.
You run into it.
Love it. Love what you do, David Peck.
Thank you so much, and same back to you. And look, we're going to sort it out, and you're going to be a guest on Face to Face in the near future.
Yeah, sounds great. Again, amazing audience, David Peck. David, a pleasure, I treasure. Thank you for being on what is inspired by 12-minute convos with Angel Jones. This podcast is produced by Pod Edits. Visit podedits.com for professional podcast publishing.